I think sales is a fascinating space to bring research methods and data to bear. And I think it's interesting because it's one of these spaces where there's so much data collected. If you think about all the data in CRM, you think about all the unstructured data today, recorded calls on Zoom or in Gong or in other platforms like that. I mean, we're just sitting on mountains and mountains of data. And what's so interesting is that in sales, you know the outcome, right? You know whether a deal was won or lost. You know the size of the deal. You know how long it took to close it. You know whether it was what it was lost to. Was it lost to a competitor? Was it lost to no decision? But the irony of all that is that, despite all this data, sales is really a land of kind of hearsay and conventional wisdom and passed down folklore and things like that. It's a lot of personal opinion that tends to dominate the sales landscape. And so I try to do the opposite, which is let the research and the data speak into what best salespeople do. And again, how customer buying behavior is evolving. So again, a little bit of a different approach. Now to the challenger sale, that goes back to 2008. So I was running the sales research program or team at a company called CEB, which then became part of Gartner Group, of course, in 2017. And now called Gartner for Sales Leaders, actually. So that was the genesis of this research in '08. For those of you who I date myself a little bit here, but that was a pretty tough time to be a salesperson. It was the height of the financial crisis. It was just really, really tough time to be a salesperson. And so we went out, running our research team, we went out to our members, our clients around the world, heads of sales, and asked them, how can we as a research team help you in this time? And what all these chief sales officers came back with was a pretty clear question, which is, we know it's tough out there. We know that most salespeople are struggling, but on every team, there seemed to be a handful of salespeople figuring it out. And they were bringing in deals that we would be excited to bring in the best of times, but they were doing it right in the teeth of the Great Recession. And so there was this big, concern or question that people had about what it was that these folks were doing differently, and is there something we can learn from that? So that was really the origin of that study, which we started in 2008. It spanned several years. We continued to collect data. We eventually wrote the book, The Challenger Sale, in 2011, which was kind of the culmination of the first wave of research. And then we did a follow-on book a couple of years later called The Challenger Customer, which looked at more kind of the second phase, if you will, of challenger selling. And most recently, the Jolt Effect, I think, is kind of an extension of that research yet again. So. The latest problem, the latest challenge and big change in customer buying behavior is the rise in no decision losses. And we've been tracking this for a number of years, but in the Jolt Effect, we talk about how anywhere between 40 and 60% today of the average salesperson's qualified pipeline is ultimately going to be lost to no decision. These are just deals that evaporate on you. The customer ghosts you, they go radio silent, and you never really get a clear answer as to why. You don't know if they went with a competitor. You don't know if they preferred their status quo. They just kind of, again, they ghosted you, and you just mark it as closed, lost, no decision in the CRM system when your manager tells you, hey, it's time to cut bait here, time to move on to the next opportunity. And so the Jolt Effect was really a story about why that happens and why we're seeing an increase in those no decision losses in general, but I think especially right now where, are we going into a recession or are we not going into a recession? Nobody seems to know. It's the news goes one way or the other depending on the day, right? But we do know a lot of firms are acting with tremendous caution. There's a lot of budgetary scrutiny, a lot of eyes, and even low-level purchases. Look at the SaaS market, just for instance. The past couple of years have shown companies that they bought a lot of shelfware over the last few years, and CFOs and procurement are really running these vendors through the ringer, and they're really being very cautious before they leap to the next SaaS product or the next technology-based solution they buy. And so that's really caused a lot of hesitation, which has ended up driving a lot of no decision losses. So the Jolt Effect was kind of our answer as to what do the best salespeople do to avoid those no decision losses and sell differently in an era of heightened customer hesitation, if you will. Now, I think traditionally, salespeople have been taught that when the customer gets cold feet, the reason is that they are suffering from status quo bias, right? They still believe what they're doing today is good enough, What you're talking about is not a compelling enough reason to change. In other words, you haven't addressed the why change question, or maybe solving this problem is not a big enough priority for their business. Those are all status quo preference issues. And so what salespeople do is they go back and they dial up the FOMO, the fear of missing out. So how could you afford to say no to these wonderful benefits we're going to bring to your organization? Or, hey, I turn the screws a little bit. I create a burning platform, dial up the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You can't afford not to solve these problems. It's leading to tremendous risk and cost and lost revenue growth and customer disengagement, employee churn, whatever the bad outcome is we want to dial up. And if those things don't work, usually what salespeople go to is the 10% discount that's only good this quarter, right? Those are all FOMO tactics to try to get the customer to move forward. And this stuff has been passed on for a very long time. In fact, in the Challenger sale, we talked about how challengers are really good at breaking the pull of the status quo, which is very, very powerful on the customer's mind. People don't like to change. It takes a lot to get the customer to change. It's always easier to stick with what you're doing today, even if it's not great. And the vendor's proposal is going to make you much better off. Customers will still pass up on better opportunities just to keep doing more of the same. So we know the status quo is a big enemy in sales. But what surprised us is that those FOMO tactics actually backfire way more often than they work out. With a customer, in particular, a customer who said, I'm on board, I'm ready to move forward, and then they get cold feet and they start to hesitate, when you dial up the FOMO with those people, it actually makes it more likely the deal will be lost to no decision. So there's this question as to why is that? And we dug into the data, we found something pretty fascinating. A couple of things, actually. The first thing is no decision losses are driven by two factors, not one. The one we're all familiar with is the customer who prefers their status quo, but just never tells you, right? They never say, hey, I think the solution we're using today is good enough, right? I think our homegrown solution, it's fine. Our legacy system, it will make do, right? They just never communicate that, but really they chose to stay put. That's a decision, but it turns out that's only 44% of no decision losses. 56% of them are customers who are stuck in a state of indecision. Now, indecision by definition is not a decision. It's a wasteland between wanting to take action and being able to take action. These are customers who want to buy, but they can't buy. And the question is why? Well, what we found is that what really keeps them from moving forward is their fear of failure. And this is the second thing we found. The three specific things that customers are worried about messing up are, one, have I chosen the right configuration, right? The vendors put a lot in front of me, different partner integrations, different contract lengths, different use cases, professional services, DIY, you name it. But the vendor let 1,000 flowers bloom. And our budgets are tight, and I cannot afford to configure this the wrong way. We got to say yes to the right things and no to the right things. We cannot screw this up. So that's the first thing we call that stems from choice overload, where the customer looks at too many options and they just get paralyzed with indecision. The second driver or fear of failure they have is that they haven't done enough research. They feel like the next Gartner report or the next analyst they talk to or the next person in their LinkedIn network they consult, that person will have all the answers, because what they're trying to avoid is a situation in which they get surprised after the contract is signed when some new piece of information comes to light, and that piece of information maybe makes the purchase decision seem like not such a great decision after all, and then they get blamed. The third fear of failure stems from what we call expectations overload. This is the customer who feels like they just won't capture the full benefits from the purchase. They won't realize the full ROI, the cost savings, the revenue growth, whatever it is. And what's interesting about this one is that customers don't blame vendors for that. They never say, we found very rare cases in our analysis of the vendor who said, or the customer who said to the vendor, I don't believe you. I don't believe your proof points. I don't believe your ROI projection. I don't believe that reference customer. I think you had an actor playing that reference customer. They were, feeding me a line there. They don't say that stuff. What they do is they blame themselves and they say, I don't think our company can accomplish that because we're so dysfunctional and we never realize the full benefit from purchases like this or investments like that. It's hard to point to one in particular. Certainly, I think Salesforce is a household name all over the place. I know when we were doing the research in the Jolt effect, while we got these sales recordings from a variety of virtual, video conferencing tools or web conferencing tools like Teams and WebEx and Zoom, and from conversation intelligence platforms like Gong, like Tether, ExecVision, others. I think that a lot of the companies we were working with had all of those calls appended to Salesforce records that dynamically updated and allowed us to really understand the state of those different opportunities. And I think, you know, in many respects, it's become kind of a system of record out there. Now, of course, there are competitors and there that offer different capabilities to different types of organizations, right? So there are HubSpot and others that offer a different take and a different model at doing that. But I would say, you know, as a category, I think a lot of this really does start with CRM and really understanding. Without that, without a single source of truth around prospects and live opportunities, existing customers, you know, everything else kind of falls apart, right? You don't know what customers are looking for. You don't know why deals are closing or not closing. It's hard to forecast, right? It's hard to allocate territory, prioritize opportunities. It's really hard to be a modern sales organization without that capability. Then, of course, there's so much we can layer onto that, right? Revenue intelligence, tremendous forecasting tools, sophisticated comp modeling tools, conversation intelligence tools, you name it. But I kind of feel like in the modern sales era, like that's the chassis upon which the tech stack is really built. There's so many phenomenal vendors out there. I mean, Gartner covers this whole landscape, right? And it's so rapidly evolving. If we just think about sales tech, for instance, the sales tech space is huge. It's just amazing. It's exciting, and almost every vendor I come across, and I like sitting on demos. I like seeing what people are up to. I like seeing how people are bringing generative AI and these new capabilities to bear to help sales organizations be more effective and productive. I'm blown away. Like I got to be honest, like I haven't seen anything where I'm like, that's stupid. Why would you build that? It's just like, I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Is usually my reaction. But I'll tell you that as far as a mistake, I think the biggest mistake sales organizations make is buying technology and assuming that technology will drive behavior change. I think it's the way that this almost always happens is that you got to do the hard work of training and coaching your team, incentivizing them the right way, building the right sales culture, and then technology is a really, really powerful enabler. But if you don't take Challenger, just for instance, if you had a software platform or a tool and you said, hey, it's going to nudge people or it's going to provide Challenger nudges or Challenger suggestions or recommendations to salespeople, but they don't understand why they should be doing that, it kind of gets ignored. And then it becomes shelfware. And there's not a lot of shelfware surviving the current economic environment, certainly not in the CFO's eyes, right? And so I think sales organizations cannot use technology as a workaround. There are no shortcuts, right? It's like if you want six pack abs, you probably have to go to the gym. There's no magic six pack ab pill. And technology is not a sales effectiveness pill. It is a phenomenal accelerator. It's a great stickiness tool. It's a great reminder. It's great at so many things, and it makes today's sales world so exciting. But you can't use it. There are no shortcuts to doing the hard work of behavior change and skill development with your sales team.